And that was the Vigil's very own rap artist. And we can now go down to the northeast of England, an area which was set against Scottish Home Rule in 1979. Diana Medill is with a number of people in yet another pub.
Same pub. Kirsty, we're still here. We can't do the rounds just yet. Huge interest, yes, in what's going on just over the border as to what the neighbours are doing just north. Hugh Morgan-Williams, how much of an economic threat do you think a Scottish Parliament would be?
Well, Scotland and Wales have a unique system now, which means that we can't operate on a level playing field. And the government plans for regional development agencies, we feel, does address that to some extent. So that's something we support and look forward to the implementation of by next year.
But the point is, you need power on the local ground here.
You need economic self-determination.
Keep the politicians out.
Well, in our experience, you get more politicians, it costs you more money.
How powerful would you like to see the Assembly, John Tominey?
Well, I think I'd like to see it evolving in the direction of a Scottish Parliament with the powers over all areas of social, political, cultural, economic life within the region.
Including tax-raising powers?
I think in the longer run, why not have that as an ambition? I think it's unlikely in the short run, but I think, you know, for a Parliament, for an Assembly to be meaningful, it does have to have access to its own resources.
And if Scotland goes that way, Bill Weeks, the northeast of England might well have to adopt something like that to stand up.
I don't think so at all. I mean, we've seen emotion coming into the political equation here, and when emotion comes into it, common sense flies out the window. If the Scots have tax-raising powers, OK, the greatest industry in Scotland is no longer going to be what's left of the shipping industry, it's going to be tax evasion. And we certainly, in this area, we stand on our own two flat feet. Here we are on the banks of the once coaly Tyne, shipbuilding, mining, steel, phoenix light out of the ashes of the ruins of those industries we've built with our own hands and our own initiative. The initiative for Siemens, the Nissan car country. We don't want these regional assemblies.
Why not have an assembly to reinforce all that?
But why? I mean, we've got the Northern Development Company, a catalytic agent which can help us to get grants if we need them. If we need them. We've got our own local councils, good, strong men, steeled in the fires of industry. We've got our county councils. We've got everything we want. We Geordies are proud people. We don't need this sort of thing. Bureaucracy breeds corruption. It breeds also jobs for the boys. No, no, no. Let's just go on our own ways we've been doing.
Now, Jill Hale, you're from the TUC. Do you need an assembly in the northeast in order to get more jobs?
Yes, we do need a directly elected assembly, and we need an assembly because we need some more accountability. We've been hearing about the success in the northeast. What we need is
But do politicians actually create the jobs themselves?
Politicians can ensure that there is inward investment into the region. They can ensure that the region has a profile, and they can ensure that that in itself is a good thing for the region. And that's an important aspect which I think we must pursue. But what is also important is that we have some accountability, that there is a directly elected assembly so that people in this region actually have a say. So it isn't businessmen that entirely dominate the region. People who live here have a say in what happens in this region.
Carl Watkin is a businessman from this area. Where do you fall down in this debate?
We don't fall down at all. The northeast of England is the fastest changing region in Europe. It's been transformed over the last 20 years. 35% of our employment 20 years ago, as Bill has said.
So does it need regional development authorities and parliaments?
I'll come to that. The Regional Chamber of Commerce, which is at the leading edge, the only regional chamber of commerce in the country, is very much supportive of regional development agencies, RDAs. We're very much in support of RDAs with a clear focus objective which the northeast, as the fastest changing region in Europe, has had over the last 20 years. What we're against, and we've heard a bit of it tonight, I've heard comments in the background of we're in. If we're in, then that presupposes that there is a they who are going to lose out. I'm interested, the business community, the Regional Chamber of Commerce is interested in a clear, focused objective through an RDA, and my worry is it doesn't matter whether it's business people or politicians involved in running a regional assembly. At the end of the day, they will be corrupted by the power base, and I'm only interested, and the Regional Chamber of Commerce is only interested in producing a fabulous result which we've demonstrated we can deliver in the northeast of England, the fastest changing region in Europe, over the next 20 years.
You see, John Tominey, a lot of suspicion of letting politicians loose to organise things within a region.
No, this is not letting politicians loose. This is letting the people of the region control what is already a large number of organisations which are spending large amounts of public money in the region. It's giving a chance to the people of the region to control and have a say in how that money is spent. It's got nothing to do with politicians in that sense. It's about the people of the region and trusting the people of the region to make the right decisions in their own interest.
These people don't trust the people.
Well, they're business people, and they're saying what business people say. frankly, and that's fair enough. And they have their interests.
We know how to create wealth in the region.
That's fine, and you carry on doing that. But let's let the people in the region have a say in how public money is spent
but they
on their
already
behalf.
have through their councillors and through their MPs.
We have a
a
government office in this region which spends hundreds of millions of pounds on behalf of the people in the region, largely obscured from the view of the population of the region. And it's that kind of issue which a regional assembly would address.
Thank you all very much indeed. And that's the end of the moment for the passionate debate here in the northeast of England.
Well, lively lot in Newcastle, but now we have Robin Oakley, BBC's political editor. Robin, let's just pick up on what William Hague might be thinking of at this very moment. He'll be thinking now about how to proceed vis-à-vis devolution.
Yes, beginning to think we're the only people who aren't in a pub tonight, actually, Kirsty. But, I mean, for William Hague, the problem now is a real problem of leadership, how he pulls his party together on this question, because the speed of reaction and adjustment to what is happening is likely to be rather different in Scotland and in the Scottish Conservative Party to how it is at Westminster. And, of course, in the immediate future, he's got the Welsh campaign to fight. He can't have the Tory party rolling over and waving all its paws in the air at this point. He's also got the legislation coming before the Commons, and it's the duty of an opposition to oppose.
But when you hear John Redwood, repeating a litany of what he thinks the Scottish Parliament would mean, and then you have Lord Fraser saying tonight that a yes vote in the first question means we cannot impede this bill, might it be that there is a split between the Westminster view and the view of Scottish Tories on the ground, who, a lot of themselves, are actually preparing and are on candidates lists already for Scottish Parliament? They perhaps want to start putting their case more positively if it's a yes vote, as indeed we're forecasting, than perhaps the Westminster scenario.
Oh, I think there may be a real danger of splintering here. A number of significant Scottish Conservative figures have kept out of the Think Twice campaign. There could well be a difference with Westminster in the sense of a lot of people perhaps in Scotland are going to see a future for a specifically Scottish Conservative Party that is not seen and suffering, as it has done in the past, from being looked upon as a kind of northern branch of a Westminster-dominated Conservative Party. They may see that that is the way of hope for the future.
So, in fact, we could have a divergence of the ways.
We could have a divergence, yes. That is going to be the test of William Hague's leadership if he can prevent that.
John Mackay, what Peter Fraser also said tonight was that he couldn't see, if there indeed was a Scottish Parliament, a future Conservative administration rescinding that, that in fact a Parliament would be here to stay. Do you take that view?
I think we've made it perfectly clear that if there's a decision yes tonight, which frankly that doesn't look likely, I've never had much doubt about that, Kirsty.
We just want to hear, I think what we're doing is wanting to hear the words because you're so adamant.
Well, I knew you wanted to hear them. I knew you were so keen to hear them, but frankly I never had much doubt about it. So if the Parliament is set up, the only way I believe that it could be rescinded would be by another referendum, and I think frankly that's the only possible way, and we're really looking into a long way off crystal ball if we start talking about that.
Let's turn now to Brian Wilson and pick up Alex Salmon's line that this tonight vote for a Scottish Parliament is the first point of the journey on a destination to independence. Do you take huge exception to that, as I imagine you do?
Well, I don't take exception to it. He's got to say it. He's got to rationalise his position. But I think if you want to find what the nationalists actually think of this, you have to go back before the last month and look at their boycott of the Constitutional Convention.
But were you not part of the plan to stand shoulder to shoulder with the SNP? Do you now think that perhaps you shouldn't have stood shoulder to shoulder with the SNP? After all, like Simon said, the SNP votes were critical to this result tonight.
Everyone, I mean, in a referendum, everybody comes in on either the yes side or the no side, and of course, it was impossible for the SNP to come in on any other side, or else they would have been in the absurd position of campaigning against the establishment of a Scottish Parliament. So I don't have any problem. I just think he's wrong. And if you look at every European experience, the reassuring thing for everyone in the United Kingdom is there is not one single example in Europe of devolution leading to separation, and there won't be in the United Kingdom.
Right, well, let's turn round now and see what Peter makes of all this.
Well, Kirsty, it's not only that we're forecasting a huge majority for the yes vote on the Scottish Parliament. That's something like 4 to 1, a little bit less than 4 to 1. There's also something even more important than that to say about it. It's a matter of credibility for the yes. Let's just have a look at the comparison here between last time and this time so far. Here's what happened last time in the Scottish referendum of 1979, when there was nearly 52% yes, 48% no. It actually won. The yes vote actually won in the straight simple majority referendum in 1979. But there was a problem, as I'll show you in just a moment. Let's just compare that yes with the yes this time. 78%. Look at the difference in the yes this time and the yes last time, and the no this time and the no last time. Now, when you compare the yeses, indeed there's a huge pile on the right there, small pile on the left, but the problem last time was that they set themselves a hurdle. Labour government were forced by one of their backbench members to set a hurdle of 40% of the whole of the electorate. That was the target the yes had to reach last time. It didn't get there. It was only 33% odd of the vote of the whole of the Scottish electorate voting yes last time. This time, there isn't a hurdle. There is no precondition. It has to reach 40% of the electorate. But just look what's happening at the moment. The yes vote is way through. Very nearly half the Scottish electorate so far are voting yes. And we reckon it's going to be round about the 50% mark, Kirsty, by the end of the night.
So, in fact, way over the 979 hurdle. And now we can go over to Edinburgh, where Anne Mackenzie is joined by two senior politicians. Anne.
I'm sure they'll be glad to hear themselves described as that. Charles Kennedy, Liberal Democrat MP, and Henry McLeish, Scotland's Constitution Minister, and of course one of the architects of the White Paper. Henry McLeish, I presume you feel it's all more or less in the bag?
Well, we're very pleased indeed with the first two results. It clearly indicates that Scots have welcomed the opportunity to choose the future, and we've received substantial endorsements on both questions. It augurs well for the rest of the evening, and I think it augurs well as well for the future of Scotland in terms of getting the bill through the House of Commons and getting on with the business of electing a parliament.
Charles Kennedy, the fear was always the second question, it seemed. How much do you think Labour's pledge that tax would not be raised in the first 2 years of the Parliament anyway, how much do you think that went towards soothing nerves?
It's difficult to judge. I mean, I think it obviously would have soothed a significant number. But equally, I found, I'm talking just from a local perspective here in local meetings, that a lot of the arguments that came through was not so much whether the power would be used, but the sense that there would be more responsibility to the Parliament if the potential for the power was there. In other words, if you set up a Parliament which didn't have the capacity to either lower or raise tax, that would be actually more of a conduit for passing any old motions you like, adopting any old stances you like, without actually having to account to the people through their pockets.
But Labour's stance was not one that the Liberal Democrats particularly appreciated, did it? Because you yourselves have talked about raising tax for specific issues like education.
Yeah, and well, we will see what happens in 2 years' time once we get beyond the first set of elections to this Parliament, when we see what its complexion politically is like.
Could I just mention that polls seem to suggest that Labour might be able to get in a majority in this Parliament, polls running tonight?
I don't
without
think
needing the Liberal Democrats at all?
Well, I mean, I think we're really jumping ahead of ourselves. We've only had 2 results at this stage. Let's see what the overall result is tonight. And I don't think that necessarily will tell us what the party political opinion polls are in 18 months or 2 years' time, when the government is in mid-term and other issues are crowding in. I do see tonight as stage 2 of a process that began on May the 1st.
Well, Henry McLeish, we do talk about this Parliament as one of consensus, and it has all been very chummy up to now, I suppose, between the 3 parties. But how long really can that last? Alex Salmond was on earlier, and he was being very conciliatory, but he was still insisting that this is the first step on the road to independence.
I think the important thing, Anne, is to look at the May the 1st election. 80% of Scots voted for parties that wanted constitutional change. That was the first step in the process. We now have the referendum. Again, the 3 major parties have worked together to make sure that Scotland's interests were put high up on the political agenda. I think people have liked seeing a new type of politics. They've seen this consensus emerging over constitutional change. That doesn't mean that when we come to elections for the Parliament, we won't be fighting our corners to ensure that we get maximum representation. But that said, you know, the real tragedy of tonight is that once again the Conservatives are isolated. I'm sure there must be Conservative voters out there who want some leadership on the issue. The good thing would have been if all the political parties had supported constitutional change. I just hope the lesson for the Tories tonight is to learn from what happened. They didn't learn on May the 1st, and actually assume now that with the additional member system in the way that the Parliament will be voted in, that gives them a chance to be rehabilitated. Let's hope they take it.
Right, gentlemen, thank you very much for that. For the moment, back to Kirsty.
Well, at this stage, let's whip around and look what's happening outside. There we can see the party in Edinburgh's got a bit much more wild, in fact. Since we last went over to it, no sign of John Sopel, but indeed at the party there's fire eating. Lots of very tall people there. And we can now look to what's happening in Orkney and hear from Craig Anderson. Craig.
Well, no fire eating here, actually, Kirsty, but a few sandwiches perhaps being nibbled round the fringes. I think it's what you call an expectant hush here, because we're expecting the returning officer, Alistair Buchan, to give us the declaration from Orkney in just a few moments from now. Quite a poor turnout, as we understand it, something like 50%, which is down on the last time in 1979, down about 5%, if in fact that is the official figure. But looking around the tables, talking to people who've been scrutinising the counting tonight, it looks as if it's very, very close indeed. There was some money, if you like, people betting on perhaps a no-no from Orkney a couple of days ago, but from what we've been seeing today and from what we've been hearing, it could be very, very close indeed.
Thank you very much, Craig. One to watch, Orkney in a few moments' time, and the prediction that it will be very close. Now we can go straight over to Aberdeen and Jane Frankie. Jane, what's the news from there?
Well, Kirsty, despite the low turnout, which incidentally is expected to be confirmed at 53%, that's considerably down on the general election where it was around 70%. Despite that low turnout, it is taking longer to count the votes than had been originally thought. So they're still talking in about half an hour's time before we have a result from here. I should say, though, that the yes camp are looking very confident that they've won on both questions. But the no camp are not, interestingly, conceding defeat on the tax question here in Aberdeen. One interesting point to illustrate how low the turnout was, at one polling station in the city, there were only 11 voters in the first 6 hours.
11 voters in 6 hours, and that was an area of the city.
The Balgownie area of the
heavy
city.
Heavy population?
Certainly a very populated area of the city, yes, Balgownie. It's a residential area.
But nobody voting. Now we can go straight over to the largest count in the country and Isabel Fraser at Glasgow. Isabel.
Kirsty, we're experiencing very much what Jane was talking about there. We're about half an hour behind what we thought the time would be for the turnout declaration, and perhaps we won't get an actual result now until about 2 o'clock. But the indications are still that the turnout's going to be around 50%, they think, as they were suggesting earlier on in the evening. But what the Yes campaign are reading into this is that their people have turned out to vote, and in fact the No campaign have just stayed at home. But you can see here some of the counting going on here. As I say, we might get a result, final result, around 2 o'clock, which is about an hour later than we originally expected. What seems to be the picture, Kirsty, I can just advise you from the feedback from the floor, it's still pretty speculative at this stage, is that echoing some of the results you've got in already, the few results that you've got in already, that the way it'll go in favour of a parliament will be 4-1, and in favour of taxpaying powers 3-1.
Thank you very much indeed, Isabel. And now we can go back over to watch the vigil outside Carlton Hill, and we can see there are a lot of Welsh flags flying, a lot of Welsh supporters of the Yes campaign up tonight, determined to have a good party before they have their own referendum next Thursday. And indeed, Hugh Edwards is with a group of people in Cardiff looking ahead to next week and taking from it what they will from tonight. Hugh.
Kirsty, we've made a very special effort for you. We've avoided the pubs of Cardiff. We've come to the Marble Hall here in the City Hall in the Civic Centre. With me is Glyn Mathias, the political editor of BBC Wales. Also with me from the Yes campaign, Kevin Morgan. From the No campaign, Nick Bourne. Nick, I want to start with you, put it to you bluntly. Given what's happening in Scotland tonight, are you telling me that Wales will buck this trend a week today?
I don't think it is a trend. Wales is being offered a very pale imitation of what's on offer in Scotland. They've been asked very different things. In Wales, we've got a pale version of what's being offered to Scotland. It's a fudge. The government is hoping to sneak it through in the wake of what's happened in Scotland. I think that stage management will backfire.
Kevin?
These early results are very encouraging. They suggest that Scotland has the self-confidence and indeed the courage to assume more responsibility for their own affairs. I believe that may create a new climate of opinion in which people in Wales, Northern Ireland and the English regions also begin to feel more self-confident.
But are you saying that the average Welsh voter, if there is such a person, will actually wake up tomorrow and say, well, the Scots have voted in favour, so perhaps I should as well? It's a very insulting view, isn't it?
I think it will concentrate minds in Wales, and I think Welsh voters won't want to wake up and feel that they might get left behind now that Scotland appears to be getting a much stronger voice. I don't think people in Wales will want to get left behind at a time when London may be voting for their assembly next May.
Nick, isn't it a fact that if you do have big headlines from Scotland saying Scots vote in a pretty big majority, in a pretty impressive way for their package of measures, it's unrealistic to expect that not to have any effect on people here?
I don't think it will. Obviously, people here wouldn't recognise what's happened in Scotland, but I think it's very patronising to assume that the Welsh people haven't got the intelligence and the courage to look at the issues in their own right. We're being offered a second-rate version of a third-rate idea. It's very different from what's being offered to the people in Scotland, and I don't think people are going to follow slavishly what Scotland does. They'll make their own minds up on the issues.
Will they not?
They will indeed, but there are big differences between Scotland and Wales. Wales has always been more integrated into England, but nevertheless, on the day, I believe that if the Scots register a strong, robust yes vote, I believe that will affect the climate of opinion in Wales.
I suppose you failed on one level, Kevin, if I can put it rudely, because this has been an incredibly boring campaign in Wales. You don't seem to have enthused people in the yes campaign, no more than the no campaign seems to have done. Why has the campaign been so flat? Why are people not apparently exercised by this question?
I think people find it very difficult to understand constitutional change. It's been very difficult to convey the significance of this issue. And of course, we haven't been helped by the tragic circumstances of Princess Diana. These things haven't helped, and they haven't concentrated people's minds in a way that they might have done.
Glyn, can I turn to you on the key question of the turnout? Because obviously it's a very sensitive issue. There have been lots of suggestions that perhaps there will be a poor turnout in Wales. Is there a magic figure which the government will hope to pass which will make it at least respectable?
Well, last time round in 1979, the turnout here in Wales was 58%. I think, given what's been happening so far in Scotland, at least the government would like to see a turnout of 50% to give some credibility to a yes vote. It was always going to be a much closer fight here in Wales than in Scotland, a much closer fight. There's about a third of the voters yet to make up their minds or even to be enthused or interested in the subject at all. So the government needs to get those people out to the polls.
We heard what Alistair Darling was saying on the programme earlier on about turnout there. He was saying, look, we have a result. That's it. The Scots have made up their minds. Surely they'll be saying the same thing in Wales. If it happens even with a turnout of, let's say, 46 or 45 or 44%, they will say, well, hang on, OK, that's a bit disappointing, but we still have a result. It won't affect the result, will it?
No, the government is already making up its excuses for a turnout of less than 50%. Yes, a win is a win by one vote is a win, and the government will argue that that is enough to proceed with a devolution bill for Wales.
And the actual timing now of the poll in Wales, given that it is a week later, it's a week today, the logic of that becomes increasingly clear, doesn't it?
Well, you don't have to be too cynical to realise that the government thought of this in advance, that a yes vote in Scotland could lead to a greater chance of a yes vote in Wales. Some say a 10% boost to the yes vote from a convincing yes vote in Scotland. Some say no, and Nick Bourne has said that the issues are entirely different, and they are different. But a certain Me Too element, I think, will come into the debate.
A very, very quick word to both of you, and I mean quick. To you, Kevin Morgan, first of all, 50% would be respectable. Anything under that would undermine you.
Yes, 50% would be a realistic level. But the key issue is about self-confidence.
And for you, Nick Bourne, is there a magic figure that you think we should be looking at?
Well, a 50% turnout hardly indicates much enthusiasm for the proposals that are being put forward. It may be a realistic figure, but it doesn't indicate that the Welsh people would want an assembly with that sort of turnout.
We shall see. Nick Bourne, Kevin Morgan, Glyn Mathias, thank you very much indeed. Kirsty, from the splendour of the Marble Hall here, back to you.
Thank you very much. And very soon we're expecting the West Lothian vote, a Central Belt vote, and indeed the Orkney vote, the northernmost vote, along with the Shetland Islands. Now, what has informed the way people have been voting? What's been the mood and what's been the atmosphere? Peter Snow has a lot of details from our specially commissioned poll.
2,000 people, NOP spoke to us over the telephone in the last couple of days, and you get a powerful sense of an overwhelming mood of positive attitude by the Scottish people towards the idea of a parliament. Just have a look at some of this. We asked, NOP asked, will the effect of a Scottish parliament be that Scots will have more pride? Will it bring more jobs and investment? Or will it raise income tax, we asked as well. Now, the answers on all those were very positive. 75%, three-quarters of Scottish people said, yes, a parliament will give the Scots more pride. 64% said, quite contrary to the argument of many industrialists that it wouldn't bring jobs and investment, said that it would. Something like two-thirds of Scottish people believe it would. 61%, yes, indeed, did say to us that it would raise the Scottish Parliament, would almost certainly lead to a raising of income tax. But when we analysed those people by their attitudes towards devolution, most of them were very pro-devolution. So in spite of the fact that they think taxes are go up, they're still pro-devolution, which may raise tax. So on the whole, then, a very positive attitude towards devolution for those reasons. Here we have a sense of identity. What was the sense of identity, we asked people, that people had in Scotland? 57% said they felt much more Scottish than British, or indeed they felt Scottish, not British at all. Only 10% said they felt British or more British than Scottish, and only a third said that they felt roughly the same both ways. Kirsty.
Mackay, then, clearly from that poll it would indicate that a parliament would certainly enhance a feeling of nationhood and a pride in the Scottish identity. Do you deny that?
Well, I don't have a problem with my pride in my Scottish identity, whether I have a parliament or not. I understand exactly who I am and what I am. I'm proud to be both Scottish and British. I'm surprised people don't share that, but obviously they don't. So clearly, if that's what the poll says, but I think that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is how we go on, and if we are going to create a parliament, which it looks as if we are, how we get it to actually link in and integrate within the United Kingdom, so that we don't get the divisive forces that the SNP will most assuredly try to unleash.
Well,
and I think this is going to be...
Well, let's talk about this, but let's keep our eye on what's happening at the conference centre, because we are expecting that West Lothian vote very soon. Brian Wilson, picking up from another detail of the poll there on the question of Scottishness, that people feel happier to have a more Scottish identity than a more British identity. Would that be something you would have expected now?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything remarkable about these figures. I think you get almost exactly the same figures in England. It's a confused... People have a dual identity, and if you ask them in the street, are you more Scottish or British, then, it doesn't really matter that much. People have a dual identity. The great majority of people in Scotland want the best of both worlds. We want our strong Scottish identity, but we also value being part of the United Kingdom. And that's what devolution's about.
And moving on to the economy, certainly from what that poll was suggesting, that people will expect you to deliver a greater number of jobs and more substantial investment under a Scottish Parliament. The onus is on you to deliver that.
Oh, the onus will be on the Scottish Parliament. I think that's right. I think that is an interesting expectation, and of course it runs entirely contrary to the scaremongering. And of course I know in my present job as the Industry Minister that but nobody has been frightened off from investing in Scotland because constitutional reform was on the agenda any more than they were frightened off by a Labour government. So all the scare stories have run out of steam.
Well, looking at that poll too, Dr. Alan McCartney also talked about the majority there think that the Scottish Parliament would indeed raise income tax, but as Peter was saying, that did not seem to affect the decision about whether they voted yes.
No, I think what we're getting here is a confident reaffirmation of Scottish identity.
Right, now we're about to have the West Lothian Declaration, so we're now going over to the conference centre.
For West Lothian, the turnout of electors was 62.6% of those eligible to vote. Here is the result for the first ballot. The votes cast for I agree that there should be a Scottish Parliament, 56,923, representing 79.6% of the ballot votes cast. The votes cast for I do not agree that there should be a Scottish Parliament, 14,614, representing 20.4% of the valid votes cast. Rejected ballot papers, 279. Here is the result for the second ballot. The votes cast for I agree that a Scottish Parliament should have tax-varying powers, 47,990, representing 67.3% of the ballot votes cast. The votes cast for I do not agree that a Scottish Parliament should have tax-varying powers, 23,354, representing 32.7% of the valid votes cast. Rejected ballot papers, 487.
So there we have the West Lothian result. This is the area that has been Tam Daly's stamping ground for a long time. He's been one of the loudest voices against devolution, and his local Labour Party expressed extreme anger at his stance. It is possible that he will now be deselected. So let's look at that West Lothian result. For a Parliament, a majority of 42,000, and for tax powers, a majority of nearly, well, just over 24,500 on a turnout of 62%. Let's look at that in percentage terms. 80% share of the vote for a Parliament against 20, and 67% share of the vote against 33% against tax-varying powers. Brian, let's pick up on that straight away. Tamdale's big, this was going to be the stamping ground for the big no vote that Tamdale was supposed to generate.
Absolutely. It's a very substantial setback for the arguments that he advanced, if not for the man himself, because he advanced those arguments, I think, in a very intelligent and acceptable way. It was intriguing to note the response of the Labour leadership, if you like, to the arguments advanced by Tamdale. The temptation must have been to get very angry with him, to threaten deselection, as you said, might be the consequence, although frankly I would doubt that. But actually the response was a more gentle response, was always patronising.
Let's now look at the party scenes now that we've actually had that West Lothian vote in. We can go over now, and as we go over we can hear that Donald Dewar has actually said this is victory now, this is a great day for Scotland. So now Donald Dewar, the normally reticent Donald Dewar, after this particular count, has decided that he can come out and say now that victory is in his hands.
It's there, Kirsty, isn't it? It's yes, but we have the results still to come in, of course, from the rural areas, which might give a different picture and bring down that majority. It's looking like it's 4-1 on the first question and more than 2-1 on the second.
But do you have any indications of what might be happening in rural areas?
Gossip only, Kirsty, gossip only, but Dumfries and Galloway and the Borders, some intelligence coming through that they may be going for a no vote on the second question. We get that we could be reviving the regional split that we saw in 1979, but it's going to be on that tax powers question rather than on question 1, although of course that's yet to be confirmed. That's gossip.
David Denver, on a quick thumbnail sketch there, it looks likely to go through the 40% barrier now.
Oh yes, I think so.
Not that it is a barrier, but I'm just...
Yes, that's right. Yes. The imaginary barrier, at least the barrier that
psychological barrier.
Indeed have in their minds. I mean, the 40% thing really, was designed to stop devolution in the past. I mean, we should forget about it now, and it's much more sensible to go just for... I mean, when you're talking about 4-1, I mean, then there's no question about legitimacy or anything like that. But it must be said, of course, these three results are all from the same types of area, basically
Labour areas, Central Belt.
Labour SNP, yeah. I mean, nothing that can possibly happen in Shetland or Dumfries and Galloway or Borders is going to alter the outcome. I mean, these are actually quite small in terms of...
But it might show different sensitivities around the country, and presumably they will be... Other people who perhaps are signalling a much tighter vote on particularly the second question, are signalling that they won't be trifled with.
Yes, well, it's a largely political divide, I think, as somebody said earlier. I mean, where there remains a kind of remnant of a Conservative voting organisation, there's going to be a slightly larger...
Well, let's look now at Orkney, and it looks as if we're going to get a declaration pretty soon at Orkney. People getting ready there. David, when you talk about the fact that these are all bunched together, basically Labour, SNP areas, I mean, still we thought we'd get East Renfrewshire much earlier, and of course that's not the case. But
that's right. That's one.
The likelihood on what's been happening earlier on this evening is that the no votes are actually going to perhaps stay at home.
Well, I mean, I think there's an awful lot of strange things being said about turnout here. I mean, the gloom of your reporter from Aberdeen and from Glasgow. The plain fact is that one of the great electoral mysteries in Scotland is why the Grampian region always has a low turnout in every kind of election.
I will now declare the result.
There we go. Let's hear the vote
area.
in Orkney.
The turnout of electors was 53.46% of those eligible to vote. Here is the result of the first ballot. The votes cast for I agree that there should be a Scottish Parliament, 4,749, representing 57.3% of the valid votes cast. The votes cast for I do not agree that there should be a Scottish Parliament, 3,541, representing 42.7% of the valid votes cast. Rejected ballot papers, 38. Here is the result of the second ballot. The votes cast for I agree that a Scottish Parliament should have tax-varying powers, 3,917, representing 47.4% of the valid votes cast. The votes cast for I do not agree that a Scottish Parliament should have tax-varying powers, 4,344, representing 52.6% of the valid votes cast. Rejected ballot papers, 66.
So there we have it from the Orkney Islands, our first yes-no of the evening. This is Scotland's smallest council. This is Jim Wallace's territory. Let's see exactly how they voted. For a Scottish Parliament by a majority of 1,208. The electorate indeed is very, very small. But tax-raising powers, tax-varying powers, against tax-varying powers, 427 votes carried the day on a very low turnout of 53%. Now let's look at that in terms of share of the vote. Yes to a Parliament, 57%. Plays against 43% saying no. Yes to tax varying powers falls at 47% against 53% against tax varying powers. Jim Wallace, this is a complete slap in the face for the idea that you could possibly be responsible for tax varying powers in the Scottish Parliament as far as your own constituents are concerned.
Come on, Kirsty.
You can't be happy with yes, no.
I would much prefer yes, but given that everyone is confidently predicting no, I mean, look at this. There's a majority of 15% in favour of the yes vote for a Scottish Parliament. Do you recall that in 1979 the majority against was 50% against? That is a 33% swing we've actually achieved in that time. And I mean, that actually, I mean, given what everyone was saying that that Orkney was going to vote no, that's actually probably a better result than I'd even dared hope for.
Oh, well, despite your protestations that, in fact, for Arcadians there'd be kind of an extra tier of devolution if there was a Scottish Parliament, they haven't bought that. They haven't bought the tax-varying provision.
No, they haven't bought the tax-varying provisions by some 400 votes.
It's a small electorate,
I'm disappointed in that, and I hope that, I mean, that will obviously, I mean, I've always made it clear that when the tax powers, which I think is perfectly clear the Scottish Parliament's going to have tax powers, it's obviously going to have to be careful and considerate when it actually comes to use them. And I mean, that's the argument we've made all along, that the Scottish Parliament, because of its nature of being elected by proportional representation, one party is not going to be allowed to exercise these tax powers on its own, and therefore, you know, all considerations are going to have to come into play.
So just say that you are an MSP of a Scottish Parliament, and the Arcadians don't want tax-varying powers, and you stand there in a Parliament and vote for tax-varying powers. How do you think that will be received back home?
Well, I think if I vote for, say, putting up tax by a penny to invest more in Orkney's schools, and people see the benefit of that, they'll probably return it. If they don't like it...
But you must have said that during the campaign and they didn't believe you.
If they don't like it, they could get rid of me at the next election. That's democracy.
Peter Snow.
Well, whether it's a minor or a major setback, that Orkney no. The overwhelming picture from Scotland so far is a powerful yes on both questions. First, the Scottish Parliament. Do you want a Scottish Parliament? Watch the votes stacking up now with these results in. There's the yes votes, green for go, red for no, and it's stacking up now, heavily stacking up for the yes against the no's. 195,370 against 55,000, the turnout 63% nearly, and that's 77.8 against 22.2 on do you want a Scottish Parliament. A majority for the yeses, a green light by 55.6%. And we're forecasting now that the yes majority at the end of the day is going to look something like 54%. A hefty majority for the yeses on that first question. What about tax-varying powers? Kirsty, back to you.
Yes, and we can go straight over. We've got another declaration coming.
For Renfrewshire.
This is Renfrewshire.
The turnout of electors was 62.8% of those eligible to vote. Here is the result for the first ballot. The votes cast for I agree that there should be a Scottish Parliament, 68,711, representing 79% of the ballot votes cast. The votes cast for I do not agree that there should be a Scottish Parliament, 18,213, representing 21% of the ballot votes cast. Rejected ballot papers 476. Here is the result for the second ballot. The votes cast for I agree that a Scottish Parliament should have tax-varying powers, 55,075, representing 63.6% of the ballot votes cast. The votes cast for I do not agree that a Scottish Parliament should have tax-varying powers, 31,537, representing 36.4% of the ballot votes cast. Rejected ballot papers, 734. That completes
so there we have it, the result from Renfrewshire, which takes in Paisley, scene of internal Labour strife, and of course the suicide of a Labour MP, Gordon McMaster. For a Parliament, the majority in Renfrewshire was 50,498. On tax powers, the majority was 23,500, a turnout of 62%. Let's now look at the share of the vote. In Renfrewshire, 79% in favour of a Parliament against 21, and on tax powers, 64, a narrower 64 against 36%. Brian Wilson, you'll be happy that all the problems in Paisley didn't queer your pitch.
Yeah, and I must just correct you, the strife in Paisley was well beyond the Labour Party, Kirsty, and I think that's a little pejorative. But yeah, it's a very good result. And what's coming across now is the the very consistent nature of the results, both the turnout and the results, extremely consistent,
right.
extremely positive.
Right, well, let's turn over to Peter now. We've got 5 results in, and you're in a position for another key moment.
And here they come. First of all, the Scottish Parliament, including the Renfrewshire one now, they're stacking up again. Here, the yeses in the foreground and the noes behind, and this time it's got a bit further ahead. The yeses are now through 200,000, they're 250,000, 264 to 73,000. The shares of the vote then 78 to 21, and that's looking like a yes majority of 56 on the first question, and we think it's going to end up, we're forecasting it's going to end up very comfortably up there in the 50s at 54%. On the second question, the tax varying powers, what's happening here? Well, we're getting a huge majority again for the yeses. Here they are stacking up again, not quite so hefty a stack as for the Parliament itself. It's going through 200,000 though, isn't it? Yes, it's going through 222,000 to 114,000, total of 62%. There are the shares represented by those votes, and it's a yes by 32%, not 54, but 32 on tax varying powers, and we're now able to forecast quite definitely that it's going to be a yes, surprise, surprise, a green light by 34% on tax varying powers. Quick look around Scotland then. Here they are, the yes majorities for the Scottish Parliament, the biggest one in Clackmannan, down to the Orkneys, where there was indeed a 15% majority for a Scottish Parliament. Here we have the tax varying powers. There are the majorities for that, again slightly smaller. One's missing, Orkney of course, a no majority there of only 5%. Indeed, as Jim Wallace was saying, it was something like 3-2 against tax varying powers last time. And here are our majorities building up there. It's green for go from all of them on the Scottish Parliament. Look how hefty the Clackmannan is there, a huge, great 50-odd% in favour of a Scottish Parliament. Orkney, even Orkney in favour. And here are the tax-varying powers, again, hefty majorities in the central belt with that tiny no from Orkney.
So we can go straight over now to Craig Anderson in Orkney, where they did have that yes-no vote. Craig.
Yes, well, Orkney in the last referendum in 1979 voted decisively against having a parliament in Edinburgh. Now they've changed their minds. Spencer Rosie, you're from the Orkney movement, which advocates far greater autonomy for the islands of Orkney. You must be a happy man tonight, but you, at the very beginning in the 80s, were against the Scottish Parliament, as were the Orkney people themselves. Yeah. Why have you changed your minds, and why have they changed their minds?
I think a huge amount of work has gone into the creation of the forthcoming Scottish Parliament through the Scottish Constitutional Convention. And the convention accepted the principle that the islands need to be treated differently. So we have a marvellous opportunity now for the islands to get a greater say over our own affairs, as well as something we've always supported in the Orkney movement, that Scottish people should get the same.
A bit of a reluctance among the islanders, though, for tax-varying powers, though?
Yeah, I think there is a worry about, obviously, how much the Parliament is going to raise and how much difference it's going to make to people's businesses, etc. But I think a marvellous result for Orkney, really, considering how people were very much against the last time.
Well, Councillor Keith Johnson, you're still very much against. This is obviously not a very good night for you.
It's disappointing that the people of Orkney have not demonstrated that their concerns about the possible changes in the Constitution of the United Kingdom, and the fact that they think, I think by and large, that they need another tier of government like a hole in the head, and especially a tier of government which will have no great power. All the power, I think, will remain in Westminster.
But how will Orkney be worse off?
Because I think, having seen COSLA in operation, being completely dominated by the major political parties and by the central belt, I can envisage that this new parliament will operate in a similar system, and the minnow communities in Scotland will be marginalised.
Well, Hugh Halker-Johnson, you're the convener of Orkney Islands Council. You're a pro-devolutionist. Do you think that Orkney will be, if you like, marginalised by this new parliament in Edinburgh?
No, I think the issue here, quite rightly, was one of local autonomy. And I think even a week ago it was felt that Orkney would probably vote no, tactically. But the intervention of Jim Wallace with his clause to ensure that devolution will not stop at Edinburgh and will continue to the islands, I think has had a decisive effect in this result, and we will make sure that that clause is now incorporated in the Scotland Act.
Well, that so-called Wallace Amendment is only a wish list. It doesn't mean to say that these powers, these devolved powers for the islands, are going to be built into any bill, does it?
No, but I think this result has sent a clear signal to the legislators that, in fact, the islands cannot be ignored in setting up the legislation for the Scottish Parliament.
Now, there's speculation as to who's going to be Orkney's first member of the Scottish Parliament. Are you throwing your hat in the ring?
Not yet.
Hugh Halker-Johnson, gentlemen, thanks very much indeed. That's the situation in Orkney this evening. No dancing in the streets, as you can see. A bit of a reluctance, but a yes-no vote. Scotland's first.
Thank you very much indeed, Craig. And now we can go down to Westminster to hear what the politicians there make of it, and they're with Jeremy. Jeremy Vine.
Yes, Kirsty, two MPs and one ex-MP with me. Let's talk to the ex-MP first of all, David Miller. What do you make of these results coming in?
Well, I think it's very predictable. I think that Scotland has voted decisively for devolution. The question is at what point the pro-devolution coalition, consisting as it does of people who simply want devolution and people who want independence, at what point they'll fall out, and what that fallout will be so far as Scotland's economic well-being is concerned, and the impact on England at the moment.
As it stands, do you like the idea?
No, I don't, because I personally think that it will not be to Scotland's benefit. I can't understand when, you know, if public expenditure in England is 100, in Scotland on most items of expenditure is 121, in other words 20% above expenditure in England, how they can justify extra taxation and to saddle Scottish industry just at a time when Scotland's doing well with extra burden of taxation strikes me as, well, I think the enthusiasm that people have voted for taxation tonight is all very touching, but probably in the long run rather foolish.
Of course, people watching in England may feel they're rather left out of all this, but Labour might reply that, well, you may well have a mayor of London at some point, at least if you live in the capital, and all three of you might just be candidates for that. Margaret Hodge, is that some consolation?
I don't need a consolation tonight. I'm very heartened by
Not
the
for you,
results.
but for people watching in England feeling maybe left out.
Well, I think what we've got is Scotland is the start of this process of modernising our political structure by decentralising and devolving power. And when we come to London, we're going to have our referendum in May of next year on a different sort of issue. It's going to be a different sort of decentralisation because it's city government. It's looking at a citywide government. And it's also a completely new style of politics. People will be asked whether or not they support the concept of an elected mayor. That's new to British politics. It means everybody, million more people than actually voted in Scotland, voting for an individual. And I think that'll do all sorts of things to party politics, which is not going to happen in Scotland, which I think will be fascinating to watch.
It's strange, though, isn't it? Your party spends 18 years trying to win power, and then as soon as it gets into office, spends all its time trying to give it up.
Well, I think we're living in an era of people power, and we've seen that over the last week or so with the tragic events of Princess Diana. But winning power to redistribute power, I think, has always been part of Labour's values. It's just really heartening. We want to modernise our democracy. We do want to devolve. I think decisions are better taken closer to people. And what we're actually beginning to see is that people do want to get involved in decisions. I think what's interesting about tonight is everybody predicted a low turnout. The turnout has been high, despite the circumstances, despite even the fact that it's so soon after a general election, and that shows that people do really want to have a say in a referendum, which we're not really used to in British politics.
One of the big differences watching these pictures, Simon Hughes, is, of course, in Scotland they're voting for an assembly, or they will eventually. In London, they would be voting for one person, all these millions of people. Now, there's an assembly to go along with that, but the one person will be the mayor of London.
Let's get it right. In Scotland, they're voting for a parliament, and they're very clear about that. Wales is a lesser form of parliament, but in London, it's a new form of regional government. We did have it. I mean, London, uniquely, of all the places we've talked about, has in recent times had its own regional government. This is Thatcher and her friends abolished it. This will be different, and it'll be unique for Britain, as Margaret rightly says, because it has this other element, this directly elected mayor proposal. Not yet.
But one
Parliament.
person, isn't that risky?
Well, we think it is risky as a party. We think it'd be far better to have, like the French do. The mayor of Paris is not elected by a separate vote. The mayor of Paris is the leader of the group that wins
the Parisian election. And we think that's a safer security. Now,
all right, I'll have to wind you up
is
because we're going to a declaration and get more of the story. Kirsty.
And we're going to have a declaration very soon now. We're not quite sure which one it will be, but we think it's going to be Western Isles. So we can see people shaping up there. We can see now outside on the road at the vigil, we can see the Welsh flag behind the saltire being held up as people hear the different results coming in. And now indeed the officer is going forward to do the Western Isles, the most enthusiastic area in 1979 for a parliament. Let's hear what they make of it tonight.
55.8% of those eligible to vote. Here is the result for the first ballot. The votes cast for I agree that there should be a Scottish Parliament, 9,977, representing 79.4% of the ballot votes cast. The votes cast for I do not agree that there should be a Scottish Parliament, 2,589, representing 20.6% of the ballot votes cast. Rejected ballot papers, 110. Here is the result for the second ballot. The votes cast for I agree that the Scottish Parliament should have tax-varying powers, 8,557, representing 68.4% of the ballot votes cast. The votes cast for I do not agree that the Scottish Parliament should have tax-varying powers, 3,947, representing 31.6% of the ballot votes cast. Rejected ballot papers, 167.
So there we have the Gaelic heartland of the Western Isles, even more enthusiastic this time than they were last time round. Let's see what they're saying. Majority of 7,000 for a parliament, and for tax powers a majority of 4,610 on a turnout of 55%. Now looking at that in terms of share, 79% for a parliament against 21, 68% for tax powers against 32%. Brian Wilson, very much your territory.
Well, I have a lot of connections there, and I think it is quite a remarkable result. And I think it particularly confirms the extent to which the concerns on the periphery have been overcome through the work of the Scottish Constitutional Convention and the White Paper about central belt domination. I think there was a lot of concern in 1979 that these places would be at least as remote from Edinburgh as from Westminster. I think the positive steps that have been taken to counteract that have been very, very successful.
Now over to Peter, who's got more details.
Kirsty, the race is on for the winning post now. Let me just remind you again that on each of these ballot boxes we put in a winning post. Here it is, 1,250,000, we reckon, based on the current 62% turnout, is the winning post for the yeses. Over 250,000, still a long way to go. Once it's through the winning post, then we can really declare that Scotland will have a parliament. There are the percentages, 78 to 21 on a Scottish Parliament, a huge majority for the yeses, a majority actually giving the green light by 56%. We reckon it'll end up round about the same. And on the tax-varying powers, the second question, they're stacking up now the votes, again, towards a winning post of 1,250,000 here, a long way away yet, just 250,000 or so for yes and half that for no. Turnout 62% on that question, and here we have it 66 to 33, something like 2 to 1 on this one, 3 or 4 to 1 on the first question, a majority for the yeses of 32%. We think it'll settle down at round about that.
David Denver, lots of small councils, but none of the big ones coming in.
I mean,
yet.
one of the interesting things is that whether they're big or small, there's a fairly consistent difference between the first and the second ballot. It's about 10%. So there's this 10% of the electorate who are going to become a kind of psephological, interesting people to study, because they're the yes-no people. And one wonders, well, who exactly are these people, and why are they going yes-no rather than yes-yes and no-no? I mean, we can't tell without doing surveys or, and polls and so on of them. But, I mean, it might be people who are just, quite like the idea of Scottish Parliament, but slightly feared,
Well, let's go over to the conference hall now, because we're about to hear the declaration from Murray, the SNP's stronghold in the northeast of Scotland. And this will be an interesting indicator, because, of course, it's much further away on the east coast. Again, low turnout in Aberdeenshire area, but perhaps down towards Murray, it might be a bit higher.
57%.
I will now declare the result for Murray. The turnout of electors was 57.8%, of those eligible to vote. Here is the result for the first ballot. The votes cast for I agree that there should be a Scottish Parliament, 24,822, representing 67.2% of the valid votes cast. The votes cast for I do not agree that there should be a Scottish Parliament, 12,122, representing 32.8% of the valid votes cast. Rejected ballot papers, 180. Here is the result for the second ballot. The votes cast for I agree that a Scottish Parliament should have tax-varying powers, 19,326, representing 52.7% of the valid votes cast. The votes cast for I do not agree that the Scottish Parliament should have tax-varying powers, 17,344, representing 47.3% of the valid votes cast. Rejected ballot papers, 440.
So a double yes vote from Murray, an area strong with fishing and farming and indeed also the whisky industry. Let's look at that vote now. Majority in favour of a parliament of 12,700, and on the basis on tax powers, the majority was right down there to 1,982 of a turnout of 58%. Let's look at the share now. 67% for a parliament. When you look now at tax varying powers, it's 53% plays 47%. Alan McCartney, much more concerns about tax in the northeast of the country.
I think particularly in Murray, traditionally I was brought up there, and there was always a feeling that they ought to be frugal with local government. That often meant they didn't spend on student grants and such like things. So I think that's in line. But on the other hand, it's a convincing yes on the first question. The differential is, I think, just slightly more than elsewhere in the country. The main thing is it's yes, yes, right across the country. And the point that Brian's made about the periphery, I think, are very valid, because the scaremongering was always, you'll be dominated by the people in the central belt, and this obviously is not worrying the people of Murray.
Brian Taylor.
Result this time. We're perhaps allowing some of the numbers to grind us down a little bit here. But what we're going for here is there's going to be a Scottish Parliament. It's going to have tax-varying powers. Now, the decision taken by Tony Blair to confront the people with this tax question, in some senses, if you like, goes against all of contemporary political thinking, which says that you don't talk about tax, you don't talk about money, you keep those subjects off the agenda, you talk about the goodies, you talk about education, health, and all that you're going to do. And in some senses, it's honest politics, and that's produced a result.
Well, we're about to get Dundee City, but we just might have time to squeeze in Peter for a second.
As Brian says, quite staggering. Look at those majorities for the Scottish Parliament, right the way across the country, from the Western Isles to Orkney. Here are the majorities for tax-raising powers. Orkney, the only exception when you put them together. It's all green, the picture with that tiny little red up there in Orkney. Here are the figures very, very quickly then from each of the local counts. They're all pluses there on the Scottish Parliament. Clackmannan, a 60% majority right down to Orkney. And here are the yeses on the tax-varying powers. 37% Clackmannan, something like half the majorities in each case, and only one no from Orkney there. 5% more saying no than saying yes in Orkney, but a massive yes.
David Denver, do you also take Brian's point that we're getting ourselves, in a sense, bogged down with the figures, and we should actually be looking at the global picture? We're talking about having a parliament for the first time in almost 3 centuries.
As a psephologist, I never get bogged down in figures, never at all. I mean, that's what's fascinating about it all. I mean, what I think Brian's trying to say is the sheer scale of it that we just, don't say, oh, it's only 67. Look, overall it's 77%. Don't be worried by Murray, because it is a kind of real ringing endorsement of a Scottish Parliament. Really, the thing about taxation, now of course during the campaign I'm sure some people got a bit mixed up, some voters, between tax varying and tax raising. And you need really to be a bit of a saint to vote for tax raising, and it's a lot to ask of voters, isn't it? And yet, despite that confusion, you're getting majorities for that, and I think that's really very impressive.
Interestingly, we can look at, we can go straight to the Edinburgh Conference Centre, because we're about to have Dundee City's declaration, and yet Neil McIntosh for yet another declaration. There's a man will be tired by the end of the night. It's a strong Labour area.
I will now declare the result for Dundee City. The turnout of electors was 55.7% of those eligible to vote. Here is the result for the first ballot. The votes cast for I agree that there should be a Scottish Parliament, 49,252, representing 76% of the valid votes cast. The votes cast for I do not agree that there should be a Scottish Parliament, 15,553, representing 24% of the valid votes cast. Rejected ballot papers, 406. Here is the result for the second ballot. The votes cast for I agree that the Scottish Parliament should have tax-varying powers, 42,304, representing 65.5% of the valid votes cast. The votes cast for I do not agree that the Scottish Parliament should have tax-varying powers, 22,280, representing 34.5% of the valid votes cast. Rejected ballot papers, 570. That completes
that's
the
a double
declaration
yes in the
for
city of
Dundee.
Dundee. No great surprise there. Labour stronghold for a parliament, a majority of just over 33,500. And for tax powers, a majority of just over 20,000 on a turnout of 55%. Looking at the share of the vote now, 76% for a parliament. And on tax powers, 66% for tax-varying powers, 34% against tax-varying powers. David, let's just go back then to some number crunching.
Well, some surprise was expressed there when Dundee had a 55% turnout. But what's got to be remembered is that cities, especially working-class cities, have low turnouts.
Well, I was just about to say, we've now got the turnout for the city of Glasgow, and the city of Glasgow turnout is 51.6%.
Sure, right. I mean, in the general election in Glasgow, it was only 60%. And that's in the general election, you've got lots of campaigns going on, lots of campaigners on the streets, and you don't have that this time. And you know, don't be surprised. I mean, in a way, it's quite remarkable that, you know, in very poor areas, 50% of people actually manage to, you know, get themselves together enough to go to the polls. So inner cities don't have good turnouts, and we shouldn't be surprised.
But what was quite interesting about this campaign, Brian Taylor, about how low profile the campaigners were in the streets. Again, in a general election, you have the cars going on, you have the balloons, you have very many posters up in the windows, constituency by constituency. But there seemed to be almost a kind of lacklustre feel to the campaign.
I think that's entirely understandable. I mean, you're campaigning, if you like, for a principle, for a philosophy, in some senses, where, of course, in a general election, you're campaigning for yourself.
Well, we're just about to get East Renfrewshire, so take us through a bit about East Renfrewshire. Here we have traditionally Tory area.
East Renfrewshire could be a really key one, because if we're going to get a no vote on the first question anywhere,